It will be recording. So, hello, comrades. Today I am with Tim from the Party for Socialism and Party Liberation and Socialism, Party for Socialism and Liberation, and also this team prepared the very interesting podcast about capital. Reading Capital with Comrades. It is 12 episodes which you can find in the link in descriptions. And so we will speak about capital and we will speak about your party. So firstly, I want to say one thing, which because I heard all these 12 episodes, I want to show you. I want to show you this. It is capital in Polish language. And one thing which I don't understand is that you are using the different numbers. That in my edition, it was published in Poland in 1951. But it is the same. It is the same thing which was published in Soviet Union. Here is only 25 chapters, and the book which you are working is 34 chapters. The numbers, the order is the same. For example, the last one is the theory of the colonization, and before this is the theory of the primitive accumulation. But I don't know why in Polish edition it is 25 chapters, and in English edition 34. Do you know answer?
Well, first to say, thank you again for having us on the show. We're very excited to talk about capital and talk about socialism. As to the different editions, well, Capital has been translated and published in just about every language. And in terms of why exactly there may be 34 versus the one that was published in 1951, I'm not sure offhand. I'd have to take a look at some of them. Some include maybe appendixes or other chapters that were added on in later editions or large introductions, and that's why when we start out we give the recommendation of really a couple main ones from which to choose, at least from the English language. But any version is definitely good.
Yes. It was joke. My question, because now because I recorded all this book in to make audiobook, and now I am preparing myself to make lectures about this. So it is how I found you, and it is also how I found another comrades who popularized capital. For example, there is one YouTube channel, Dissident Theory. I don't know. Do you know this?
I haven't come across that one myself.
So the comrade from the channel Dissident Theory, he read all the 3-tom volume of Capital, and he prepared more than 40 episodes, but very shortly, and it is something different than you. Your is easier to understand, and also because of you, because your voice, you make beaucoup of positive things that everybody who will listen this your podcast, you will understand what I'm. And also there is a music. It's good, very good to not to sleep, because 40 minutes, 50 minutes when somebody wants to listen, this is good idea to make breaks, pause with music, with stuff like you said. And also there is David Harvey. Reading Capital with David Harvey. Also, there is some lectures of Professor Richard Wolff. There is a reading group of organized by Vijay Prashad and Radhika Desai. So now when I'm looking for, and I all the time, every day I found another people who already make these things like me and before me. I am speaking about this because people in Poland very often ask me question, why you do this? Why you? Because it is 57 episodes of this audiobook. I make this all July and all August, and they ask me question, when will you finish? We don't want it. It is boring. It is boring. Finish with this. So why you prepared this?
Well, just to kind of kick things off, it's always wonderful to see so many people of coming to Capital in a number of different ways, and all of the resources that are now available. And our goal and our intention with reading Capital with Comrades is really to open the door and make Capital accessible to people today. And I want to highlight too, when you mentioned the music breaks and kind of the way in which things were structured, it really highlights the combination effort, of Derek being the host and I was the co-host, Mike Preisner as the producer, Nick De La Riva, who's the audio engineer, and spent countless hours of perfecting the sound and the audio levels. And the reason of why it sounds so good is really, really testament to that. And then we had this amazing music from Anahedron as well that added to that dynamic. And then, of course, the graphics from Nathan Schmidt that brought this all together and draws people in. And this also could not have been possible without our organization in the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And Curry, you and I were in the Party. We're organizers, and that's really our goal of making a tool for organizers.
And yeah, just to add to that, and again, thanks for having us on. Really appreciate it. The struggle in the U.S., socialism has become popular again in the United States because of the crisis, the deepening suffering and poverty. Bernie Sanders sort of took advantage of it and kind of helped advance that popularization. And so, it was also a historical time where something like this is needed. To bring the movement back to socialism after decades of sort of an ideological break, especially in the U.S., sort of the attack on Marxism, the attack on people's movements. And so this was, an intervention to bring Marxism back to the people, away from academia, kind of what it's intended to be for, to build the movement for socialism. So historically, also, it's just a good time for it. This is the time. People, and it's kind of testament to the amount of views it's gotten in the U.S. and around the world. So yeah, I think that's also like part of our thinking is right now this is the time for it.
And just to add to that, if I can highlight the views that we've gotten has been really astounding. We've been so amazed. It's gotten more than 40,000 plays across a number of different platforms, and as we would expect with a U.S. podcast, that the audience is mostly in the U.S., but it's reached people around the world. And in fact, the number 5 city on some of our platforms of where this is being played is Baghdad. And I think one thing that is really amazing of, how is it this is a message that's reaching people from Germany to South Africa to Tanzania to Sri Lanka to Hungary and Romania, and in all of these places is that just of what you were mentioning, and I'm sure of what's also driving you of recording the audiobook of Capital is still so relevant today, is still such a critical tool in the hands of the working class of understanding the situation, so that we're able to really build off of that and build the actual solution to the crises that capitalism faces. that capitalism creates.
Okay, so I think that the capital will be all the time in this our conversation, but I want to in the last episode of your podcast, you said something like this, that the most that you prepared this for the political activity of your Party for Socialism and Liberation. So I want to ask something about your party, and my first question is that in January this year, I prepared manifest of my party, the Polish Workers' Party. So I a lot of things what have to be done, written in this manifest, and I make a big chapter about history and also about the geopolitical situation of Poland. One thing which I don't understand that there isn't it's in your program is your historic position about the efforts to building the socialism in before in the past. So what is your position towards the October Revolution, and what do you think about the construction socialism in Poland?
Well, I will say, first and foremost, this may not be in our, or this is not necessarily in our political program, in our program that lays out our political vision of the current situation. But if you take a look at our writings on Liberation School, on Liberation News, and particularly of why we defend the Soviet Union, and why our members, really kind of going back when Curry was talking about the break in ideological continuity with the overthrow of the socialist bloc, and really the reshaping and changing of the disappearance of the socialist camp reshaped politics for the entire globe. That's led to really a unipolar era of imperialism of the United States, with more than 1,000 military bases all over the world, the aircraft carriers that are threatening other countries. And so when we look at these historical examples, we recognize them for the valiant struggle that they were of building socialism for the first time, and under the most dangerous and difficult conditions of socialism of initially of when Marx and Engels was writing, and even Lenin before the revolution was there was the view just in the socialist world that this would happen if where capital was the most developed, in Germany, in the imperialist countries, of where the level of productive forces were already so great that they were producing all these surpluses, and that didn't happen. Instead, a revolution and socialism began building in in Russia, of where the society was largely peasant based, and not able to speak to the particular circumstances around Poland and the construction of socialism there. But in each of these places where you look, the socialism and its construction never knew a day of peace, and yet, despite all of these challenges, despite all of these obstacles, despite all of the threats and economic war from the United States, economic war and military war, and this looming threat of nuclear annihilation, these countries, these socialist countries, were able to transform their societies, were able to modernize it and build society, to provide healthcare, provide education, build infrastructure that to this day in many of these countries, whether in Russia or whether in other formerly socialist countries, that infrastructure is still something that is a big part of that society. And so to that end we very much we support any socialist project that We support the socialist projects that have been attempted, and even of where socialism was overturned and where capitalism was restored. There are still so many lessons to be drawn, and so much to take in. And we'd be happy to also share some of the other articles that I mentioned of really building that importance and building that understanding.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing to that too, is in terms of what we learn from Lenin, the lessons about how to build revolutionary socialism in non-revolutionary times, is something that we gain a lot of insight from, in terms of what our work looks like, building a mass movement, developing relationships in communities. We learn a lot from those lessons and those experiences.
I want to say that your answer is very, very good for me, because most of the leftists from the United States, all the time they criticize the socialist effort in other countries. It is not real socialism and stuff like this. And what do you think about the perspective for the socialist revolution in USA? Because Comrade Curry said about Lenin, and I think that there is a lot of similar things between the situation in Russia before the October Revolution and the situation of the USA today. Russia in the 19th century was a country which was responsible for destroying a lot of revolutionary movement. Firstly, Russia destroyed the first French Revolution. It was the army of Russia which are taking Paris in 1850. And after, Russia continued destroying many other revolutionary movements in 19th century. And it was why the revolutionaries from Europe, especially Marx, all the time they were against Russia, they were against Tsar. So the Russia was the most reactionary country responsible for the destroying the revolutionary movement in 19th century. And this country, which was the most reactionary, was after the October Revolution the most progressive country. From my perspective, USA in the last century, it is also a country which tried to destroy all the revolutionary movement in the world, make a sanction, bombarding this country, attack this country, Vietnam, Cuba, and etc. But now the young generation of workers in USA is changing, that the socialism is popular. So what do you think about the perspective for the it is possible for the first time in history in the center of the imperialist countries there will be socialist revolution?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in on that one. So the question being, what's the how do we view the prospects of socialist revolution in the U.S.? Is that sort of more or less the question? So yeah, I mean, as I was saying earlier, that socialism, especially amongst younger generation, people that didn't grow up under the anti-communist bigotry of the so-called Cold War era, and the younger generation are more open to socialism. They tend to view socialism more favorably than capitalism. So those are, that gives us a lot of revolutionary optimism in terms of understanding I guess the consciousness of the broadest masses of workers when we're thinking about the prospects for a revolutionary crisis, and the consciousness of people, how they're thinking, and so that, it gives a lot of optimism. The crisis within the capitalist class political establishment, especially made so apparent and deepened under the Trump presidency. That crisis within the political establishment continues to persist. The economic situation, the poverty, the suffering, compounded by the mishandling of the coronavirus pandemic, including the failure to offer any really substantial, meaningful relief to people during the pandemic. Today, we're running campaigns to call for the cancellation of rents and mortgages during the pandemic right now across the country. Today, we're doing that, calling for 100% unemployment insurance during the pandemic so people can shelter in place. So all these compounding crises driven by capitalism's insatiable appetite for surplus value. So we're seeing, the growing crisis, growing revolutionary crisis, perhaps. Learning from Lenin, it's like, okay, well, we can't create a revolution, but we can anticipate a revolutionary crisis. And what do we do in the meantime? In terms of building the mass movement and whatnot. So, nobody can predict what's going to happen. Marxism is not a deterministic formulation for the future. We can only build out of the situation that we're in. And so that, that's sort of more or less the broad strokes, the situation. And last summer, the uprising against racism, tens of millions of people came out into the street, many of whom for the first time offered, again, a tremendous amount of optimism and opportunities to build the mass movement. So, it always ebbs and flows, but things definitely seem to be shifting. And in terms of where the people's movements are sort of re-emerging now after decades of decline.
And if I can just add to that, and building off of what Curry said, when we look at the world situation today, of what's happening, of climate change is rampant, is completely out of control. And we're just in the beginning stages. Just in this past year, what's happened in the United States, there was a huge freezing ice storm that hit large parts of Texas. They're not used to this kind of weather. None of the houses were insulated. So many people had their pipes burst, which meant that their walls suddenly were flooded. Water is everywhere. The power went out, and people froze to death in their homes. Children froze to death in their homes. Right now, in La Place, Louisiana, this is a city that's been basically leveled by this hurricane. You won't see this on the news. You'll see this on the news maybe for a few segments or a few cycles, but then it's just glossed over. But for people who now are living with no power for potentially weeks and months, these are people who have essentially been are just up for sacrifice by capitalism. And when we see what future does capitalism have in store for humanity, I mean, there's no different, there's no separate future for the working people in the United States than for working people all over the world. And we know what the United States has in store for working people all over the world, which is what we've seen with the occupation of Afghanistan, of exploiting the global South for labor, for natural resources, for pollution, and so these crises, as climate change is becoming more and more apparent to so many people, the Biden administration just resumed oil drilling. Now, tell me, what kind of solution is this offering? And this is when Curry was talking about we can't foresee the future. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. But what we do know is that these crises are going to come to a head. These crises are going to continue to get worse. And when that moment comes, of when there's a period of a revolutionary crisis, of when it's clear that there is no possible way for capitalism to resolve the situation or find a way through. This is where the question comes in of, will there be a revolutionary party? Will the working people be organized? Will they be organized not to fight for reform, not to go into a dead end and circle, which is how the Democratic Party operates? But will there be working people organized on the basis for revolution? And I will also add this: there was a South African revolutionary who said, of course, the apartheid system in South Africa also seemed that it would never go away. It would never come to an end. But after it did, he said, every revolution is impossible until it happens. And then it was always inevitable. And this is something that's been echoed and stated by many people before as well. But that fundamentally, that not only is it possible, but it's necessary. The only way that we are going to find a solution to housing, to education, to climate change, to ending imperialist war is through a socialist revolution on the means of the working people taking power and building a new basis in terms of development and how we organize society in a planned way, and really using these huge surpluses to rationally deal with them and make preparations for climate change.
I think that.
No, I was just going to circle back and say that this is in large part why we're studying capital right now, and what capital offers us in terms of really understanding sort of the internal logic of capital and how it's developed over time, and exposing a lot of the myths about that capitalism is forever, it's set in stone, it's static. The state is a neutral arbiter. All these myths that really are the bread and butter of how people are socialized in this country. Reading Capital, it goes a long way in terms of building the mass movement that we're talking about, the revolutionary party that we're talking about. So, Capital is fundamental to that, and so this was the time to launch this.
This example with the apartheid in South Africa, I think that it is an example which is also good for the Polish socialist revolution, because I think that the most important thing for the destroying apartheid was a war with Cuba, and the participation of the Cuban army and the volunteers from the Eastern Bloc to fight with the fascists from South Africa in Angola, and this war make crisis in South Africa and destroy these states. So with help of the other socialist countries, the people in the South Africa were liberated. The same example was in Poland, that the Communist Party in Poland was weak, and we have this possibility for the abolish capitalist system in Poland because of help of the Soviet Union. Now, if we take this example of South Africa, I want to ask question: where is this force which will help us? Where is the Cuban Revolution? Cuban soldiers will come and help us to destroy our exploiters.
Well, the Cuban Revolution is still very much in place. But in terms of the world situation, and it's not really possible to speak in terms of hypotheticals of like a hypothetical war for liberation or something to this effect. But when we look at the situation today of what is the biggest obstacle, as you're mentioning, to development, to socialism, but even to the development of independent nations, it's the United States, it's the U.S. empire. that places sanctions on Iran, on Syria, on Sudan, on Zimbabwe, on so many countries around the world, that uses economic weapons and its economic dominance to really obstruct and prevent countries from developing. And that's why, when Curry and I, when we're talking about not only is socialism possible, but is necessary. That's why we're in this struggle to reach people, to bring people into the struggle for socialism here in the U.S., because the wars abroad are directly connected to the wars at home. Who trains the police here in the United States? It's the Israeli occupation. Who trained the police with the method to suffocate a person with their knee, as that cop Chauvin did to lynch George Floyd? It's the Israeli occupation, and of course Israel and its occupation of Palestine would not be possible without the 3.8 billion that's given to it every single year. And so that's why when we say of not only, are the situations linked, or the struggles linked, but we all have, we're all in this struggle together. We're all in the struggle of building a future for humanity.
I invited to our conversation Comrade Rafał from the Polish Workers' Party from Poland, because we are the member of the same party, but I am located in France, and it's him, the organizer, the party in Poland, so we can compare our activity with yours, but of course we are the very, very small party, and we are already starting, and you existed from 10 years, and I saw that you are active in very cities, but I invite him to communicate our experience.
Hello, sorry for my heart, but I have hair infection, and it's better for me to wear it. It's warm, and I have problems with my ear, so it is why I wear this hat.
Well, Curry, you have a hat too. I don't have a hat, but yeah, very nice to meet you.
Yeah.
So maybe could you say something about what do you think about the electoral campaign which we launched 1 year ago with your candidate, I forget her name, La Grazia? La Riva. She's Latino. She's from Mexican origin.
Yes.
Because I saw in one videos that she speak English, and also he speaks Spanish to the Spanish workers which are there. And what do you think about this experience? Because in our strategy we also want to use the electoral campaign. Maybe in 2025 I will present myself to be president of Poland. So you are talking now with the future president of Poland. But do you think that this electoral campaign was a good experience for building revolutionary party, or not good?
Yeah, no, I can jump in. So yeah, we I guess, again, following Lenin, we go to where the people are at. And in this country, especially around presidential elections, that's when people really get politically active in this country. And so we use that opportunity to do outreach and to go to the people to talk to them about our vision for revolutionary socialism. So we always run somebody. It's a national campaign that we all participate in across the country. And it's always very successful in terms of the number of people that we're able to reach and talk to and build with. So yeah, it's been I think it's been really successful at building with people, and like I said, kind of going to where people are active and going to where they're at and talking to them and bringing our message of revolutionary socialism to them.
And just to add as well, our campaign appeared on 15 state ballots. And this is something, so there are 50 states in the US, and we appeared on 15 of them. And if you're wondering, why weren't you on all of the ballots? This really highlights of just how truly undemocratic the Electoral College or the electoral system and the Electoral College is within the United States that pretends to promote democracy and so on. Every state has their own way of running elections. And so for every state, you actually need to go and collect however many, 10,000, 50,000, maybe even more signatures to even get a person on the ballot. It's not just enough to register and say, I'm passionate about this cause, I'm going to run for office. No, you need an entire campaign, or you can pay money. And so we don't have the money part. So what we have to do is work to get on these ballots. And each one of these is a sacrifice of every single state in which we got on. And even, a number of states where we didn't get on still represented the countless hours of members who go out for 6-8 hours a day to go and ask people, will you support someone getting on the ballot? And then once we have enough signatures to get on the ballot, then we can actually begin of talking to people and saying, we're running a campaign. We're running a socialist on the ballot. You can actually vote for a socialist. And I want to say too, Gloria received more than 83,000 votes in the 2020 election, and including a number of people who wrote in their votes, which means they're very conscious about, I want to vote for a socialist. I want a socialist future. And this may not sound like a lot relative to the size of the United States, but we certainly do not have 83,000 members. Our party does not have 83,000 people, and not only that, but considering the demonization of anyone who dared to not vote for Biden, this huge and very real fear of a Trump reelection, this still represents more people who voted socialist than in 2016. It is actually the highest total for any revolutionary socialist candidate for president in over 40 years. And so our goal is to reach people. Through every possible method, and at every point of highlighting really and revealing the undemocratic nature of the electoral system, while also using this as a vehicle to draw people in and say, you can actually vote for a socialist. But not only that, you should join the struggle for socialism, because it's going to take a struggle to actually win that and see that come in. And that's something that I want to highlight is so important. So important when we go and when we talk to working people. There are some who say, well, I don't see the utility in elections. They're not productive for change. We don't have any illusions about the electoral process and whether we can bring about progressive change and socialist change through a bourgeois democratic model. We don't have any of those illusions. What our goal is to reach people and reach them with this message.
And my goal is using your example and show the other Polish people that in United States there exists a communist movement, because USA is shown in the bourgeois propaganda like a paradise, that we have to that everything in USA is good, and the the discussion about Marxism in Poland is very primitive. They said Marxism, it is Russian stuff, that it came from Russia and from Soviet Union, and the Russophobia and anti-communism, it's going together. And in the same way, so the Polish people, they loved USA, they hate Russia, they hate communism. But in their opinion, it is not possible that in USA they can exist a communist movement. So if the Polish people, they loved USA, and you will be strong in the USA, we can show the Polish people, okay, you can love USA and love the party socialism and the party for socialism and liberation.
I will say the propaganda and myth of American exceptionalism that the United States really pushes out through every possible facet, whether it's illicit and illegal counter-revolutionary radio stations like Radio Free Europe, Radio Marti, all of these different vehicles for promoting capitalist culture, capitalist ideology, is something that is a crucial tool in the hands of the imperialist. Because if they're able to put out this mask and say that yes, the United States is paradise, and really hide the fact that the wealth of this country is owned by a tiny fraction of society, and that wealth was built on the backs of the genocide of Native Americans, on the enslavement of Black people, the enslavement and kidnapping of Africans, and over centuries, that exploitation is what has built up that level of wealth, for which there have been no reparations. There have been no reparations to this end. And I think the uprising against racism that Curry had talked about really blew the lid off of this veneer and showed the U.S. state really in its stark form of terrorizing really people everywhere, people who went out and took a stand against racism, took a stand against police brutality, and saw really the reaction and the vicious crackdown that came from the state. And yet that repression also bred resistance all across the country. And I think that's something that can't be ignored, because in the city where I live in San Francisco, every day I see people rummaging through the trash, looking for things to eat, looking for recycling cans that they can go clean and then walk 3 or 5 miles with these giant bags on their shoulders so that they can get maybe $5 to $10 so that they can use to maybe barely survive, if that. I mean, that's the reality. That's the reality that exists here in the United States, where 11 million people are facing eviction. Where more than 60 million people last year were just fired, were thrown out from their jobs, where there's no protection for people, where there's no paid time off that's mandated, where there's no sick pay that's mandated. So many people are really just forced to go to work. And I know I can go on, but yeah, Curry, when you were talking about that uprising, I mean, I think that's something that really just blew the lid off of the what the reality is in the U.S. And one thing that Trump did as well was revealing that mask, which is why the Democrats didn't like him. It wasn't because of his racism, it wasn't because of his warmongering. It was because Trump took off that mask and said, "This is imperialism. This is the U.S."
I just want to add one thing, Patricia, when you're talking about the revealing the mask and the repression that so many people that had come out into the streets for the first time experienced, simply because they were appalled at seeing a police officer kill somebody. Last summer, the issue of defunding the police and abolishing the police became for a time, almost a mainstream issue. That happened very quickly. And it really, it speaks to how quickly things can shift, how quickly the working people's views and, can shift, how quickly, how optimism and hopefulness can really surge through struggle, through the experience of struggling with others. We really saw that last summer. It was remarkable, and it's I think it's had a long lasting impact. And there's, like I was saying before, there's so many people that are politically active now and seeking out to, not just having a favorable impression of socialism, but seeking out to understand exactly what it is. What do we mean by revolutionary socialism? And again, going back to the podcast of reading Capital for Comrades, socialism is popular. Now it's a matter of defining it as part of the movement for carrying that forward.
And another aspect that I'll add on the international scene of one part that has been so stark recently, among a lot of people on the left, has been realizing of, wow, this continuity between Trump and Biden, where Biden is carrying over all these same policies, all these same trajectories of the whipping of Haitian refugees, whose economy was destroyed by the U.S., whose governments were overthrown by the U.S. a number of times, there's that aspect of where people are, a lot of people are really seeing of, wow, it's not enough to put the mask back on and just pretend that everything is okay. The uprising has changed people. And I know, just as another example, in neighboring Belarus, with the U.S. essentially helping to foment regime change, and where I believe it was from last year, of Pompeo, right when the protests had erupted, of Pompeo had visited Poland, and was really saying that they were ready to send, I think, up to 25,000 American soldiers into Poland to be ready to invade Belarus. Like that. That's kind of the general thinking. And what we see is that Biden, of course, is continuing that policy. Because imperialism is not a policy. It's really the direction of the U.S. empire and part and parcel of their goals.
I can say that in August we launched two campaigns in Poland. It was maybe not very successful, this campaign, but one was against that Poland wants to buy 250 American tanks Abrams. So it is very big contract in the time when the Polish hospitals are destroying after COVID-19, and we have the Poland is very poor country, and in this time they want to buy these American tanks. And second campaign which we launched was against the TV station TVN, because this TV station TVN, it's belonging to USA. The American corporation Discovery is a proprietor of this TVN, and because this station criticized the Polish government, so Polish government wants to push a law that the television outside the Europe are forbidden in Poland. So it was against this, and this question of this television divided Polish society. The liberals are they supported this television, and we wanted to destroy this television. But we were accused that we are not communist, we are not internationalist, we are only anti-Americanist, because two campaign which we launched was against USA. But I hope that everybody understand now that we are not against American like people. We are support you, your party, the American workers, American revolutionaries, Marxists, and stuff like this. We are against American government, against American bourgeoisie, and especially in Poland, which Poland is occupied by the American forces, and the Polish politicians are totally dependent that the instruction which came from Washington, and we won't finish with this because 30 years the Poland after contra-revolution, it is all the time listening the instruction came from USA. Comrade Rafał, say something about our activity.
Yes, we have launched this campaign against this station TVN, and it is divided also Polish left or so-called left, because we don't have in Poland radical leftist. We have party Lewica, which is social democrat and love American Democratic Party. Yes? So this is this kind of leftism. And also we were criticized by anarchists because they say that this station must be, because we must to have free media and so on and so on. And few days ago, the station TVN has created a spot in news because anarchists in some region of Poland has created in abandoned building a communal squad, what is called, and the station TVN has showed these anarchists as criminals, as looters, as bad people, and so on. The anarchist has been for this station, has been against us, but this station isn't grateful for this and throw anarchists as bandits and so on. So this was our problems. It is also a problem to show Polish people that in America, as you say, people are collecting raw materials from trash to survive and so on. I run a station website, odrodzenie.fr. This is communist news portal, and if we create a news that in America is something like this, or in America is very much for people, racism has police is racist, and you have problem in America with capitalism and so on. People don't believe this, and they say that we are Russian spies to create this image of America, and they don't believe America is great. Maybe they have some problems, but saying about it, showing it, people, it's very hard, but it is our duty as party, as website, as an organization to create media to teach people, because in Poland is no other media to show things like this. So we are pioneers in this, and yes, we are accused of being Russians, of being Russian agents, paying by Kreml and so on. So I'm very grateful so I can speak with you to show Polish people that there are American leftists that are against capitalism in United States, because we don't have in Poland big leftist organizations. We have, as I said, we have this Lewica, which was very happy that Biden has won election and so on. So this is social democracy, and we in Poland need this leftist, which I run. I created this PPR, Polish Workers Party, and that's it.
That's wonderful to hear that that you have a media outlet that that you're using of promoting of a working class perspective, a revolutionary perspective, a socialist perspective, because you're absolutely right. There's no other way to really get that word out, and that's the biggest challenge, really, for socialists everywhere or in every capitalist country. Certainly, of that, we don't have access to these giant studios. We don't have the ability to necessarily reach millions of people, perhaps occasionally through social media that has broken open a new door. Although, of course, these are platforms that are owned and controlled by the capitalists themselves. Yet at the same time, of even though this work is so hard, it's also work that needs to be done. Why we appreciate coming on this show, why we also have our own media of liberationnews.org, of covering the workers' struggle throughout the U.S., of liberationschool.org, which is our more analytical pieces, of why we even made and produced Reading Capital with Comrades, and then a number of other podcasts as well that I'd like to just highlight, of Liberation Audio, where you can find many of our pieces from Liberation School and News, narrated, and then also the Socialist program with Brian Becker. These are important avenues to reach people with a socialist analysis, because it's fundamentally, it's only a socialist analysis that can get us out of this crisis. When you mention it, when people say, "Well, you're a Russian spy or Russian agent," I've heard that too. Of like, people have said that of, oh, I mean, it's just so ridiculous. Like, what do you even say? And for some people who are really just in this like set liberal mindset, there's not really much that can necessarily be said unless people are open to kind of breaking out of that really simplistic view. But when people enter into struggle, that lie and that convenient attack really doesn't work. Like, how do you explain Derek Chauvin as Russian interference? How do you explain the hundreds of thousands of voters that were kicked off of Brooklyn, of Brooklyn voting, of the Brooklyn election, who were progressive and voted for Sanders? How do you explain that as Russian interference, or the closing down of 2/3 of all polling places to prevent people from participating in the Democratic primary? This is back in 2016. How do you attribute that to Russian collusion? And that's the thing of that for the imperialists, whether they say, "Oh, this is another country dividing us for interference," it's really just a convenient pretext to ignore and gloss over the realities of people. But whether in Poland, whether in the U.S., I mean, those lived realities can't be ignored. Fundamentally, there comes a time where you just really can't. When the sky was red in San Francisco, you couldn't just look outside and say, "Well, climate change is a hoax." That's not possible. Like, these false excuses are only going to work, for so long. And as people go into motion, start demanding change, that's where we can win people over and say, not only do we need to fight for socialism, but it is possible, and anything is possible when we come together and when we fight together.
I want to use this conversation to say hello to your comrade Mike Preissner, because I know him virtually from many years. I didn't knew that he was a member. I didn't heard about your party, and so I discovered your party recently. And I think that 1 week ago he made a very good action with George W. Bush. So everybody who are I suggest you, people who are listening this, that if you not heard about this, try to find information how Mike Preissner speak with George W. Bush. It was awesome.
Just to describe a little bit about that. I highly recommend if people please check out the video of George W. Bush. This war criminal. He gets paid something like $150,000 for every single speech that he gives. What Mike and Marissa did, and you can also hear their interviews on Breakthrough News, on the Socialist program, on a number of other platforms where they talk about about this. Mike stood up as George Bush was going into some speech and called him out. And said, "You are responsible. You killed more than 1 million Iraqi people. You killed my friends. My friends are dead because of you. You sent me to Iraq. You sent me to Iraq in 2003." And then he lists off the name. He actually had a sheet of paper with a list of names of some of his friends and also Iraqis who were killed. Of course, it would need to be an incredibly long list. He was only able to read off one name before the security or the event organizers ripped that out of his hands and then tore up the paper. And that name was Joshua Castile. And this was someone who passed away. He was a veteran who passed away in 2012 from a very aggressive brain cancer that he acquired from these burn pits. And these burn pits were the product of George Bush, because not only of lying the country into war, using these false pretexts to manufacture consent and get people on board, which of course, people were not on board. There was a mass anti-war movement, and many of the organizers of our party were the leaders of that anti-war movement as well. But these burn pits exposed so many people of American soldiers and also Iraqi people, countless Iraqi people to these toxic chemicals that have stayed with them, that are still affecting people to this day. And not even including, there's so many of war crimes to go into of white phosphorus on Fallujah that now has a 30% birth defect rate. And these horrific war crimes that you have the likes of George Bush, of Obama, of all these people doing the circuit and getting paid quite handsomely for this. And where I wanted to add, and then Curry of your thoughts as well. I think this shows too of people join the military for so many reasons in the U.S. It's something that's held up as a respectable position of, if you generally see in your society, of either your friends or your uncles or people elevated within your community. It really is shown as this is a good career path, or this is a good choice to make to serve for your country. And so people grow up with this brainwashed view of this is what we should be doing. And so many people go into the military thinking that they are going to do good in the world, and then are suddenly either thrust into these positions of where they realize, wow, I'm the oppressor. Like, we're the oppressor. The U.S. military is not here doing good, but is actually the one terrorizing people. And this is why of so many U.S. soldiers commit suicide every single day. I think it's like three veterans per day. And this is reflective of the fact that the U.S. military is not a force for good. And so many soldiers who have become either conscientious objectors, turned against the war, that there's a very powerful role to play for all working people in society against this empire, holding these people to account and bringing them before a war crimes tribunal of the world.
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. Yeah, I would just add too that, in addition to just the outrageous propaganda about the U.S. military and the sort of the U.S. as this sort of global force for good, that I think that is eroding, that illusion is eroding. Patricia, you were talking about Cuba before, and we've been doing a lot of street outreach around the US's most recent attacks on Cuba, and it just, more and more people we're talking to on the streets are aware of the hundreds of more sanctions imposed upon Cuba by Trump, and that Biden hasn't done anything at all to reverse those crippling sanctions. we've been quite surprised at the number of people that are aware of these things and outraged and saying, yes, we stand with you and we stand with Cuba. But I want to go back to the what drives people into the military. And we talk about the economic draft, and as jobs are increasingly scarce, as Patricia, as you're talking about the tens of millions of people that have been laid off and fired during the pandemic as corporations were bailed out, but the people have not been obviously bailed out. That more and more people are forced out of economic necessity to join the military because it's the only available job. And so, there's a lot of those people, unlike the police, a lot of these working class people that are being forced into the military because of economic hardship, as Patricia is saying, very quickly realize that, we are not doing anything. We're on the wrong side of history here. We're on the wrong side of justice. And that, those sentiments are old. That's been, we can find examples of that when the U.S. invaded Mexico in 1846. We find examples of working class people that have been brought in to do the unjust work of the sort of the unjust military genocidal work of the U.S. military, whether it be as slave patrols, as cavalry pushing west into Native American countries. There's a long tradition of people conscripted into these armies rebelling and resisting and refusing to fight, and that seems to be only increasing.
If I can also just add too, earlier we were talking about the Russian Revolution that transformed the world, and created a completely new society of what were the demands of land for the tiller, of bread for the workers, and peace for the soldiers. And that combination is what drove this amazing force that reshaped society, that created a fundamentally different social system on entirely new basis. That took over the factories, the production, the office buildings, the mines, where they said, this is no longer for the profit of the capitalists, of the billionaires, of the millionaires, that this productive apparatus of society will be set into motion and organized to meet people's needs. That's a fundamentally different social system. And that's something of where people from all backgrounds, all working people, when we recognize that our unity and our work as a class is what sets all of society into motion, that's why we say that the working class holds the future for society, of reorganizing society on that new basis.
I want to say one big difference between USA and Poland, that in USA, Mike Preissner, when he go to the meeting of George W. Bush, George W. Bush already, he is the politician of the Republican Party, and there is many right-wing idiots and stuff like this. So the thing that Bush is responsible for the crimes, war crimes, it's something much more that we have hate Bush, but these people in the Republican Party, they are our enemies, if they are criminals or not criminals. They are against, they are all the time spreading this rightist anti-communist propaganda. The problem with Poland is that the criminals, war criminals in Poland, they came from left. In 2001 and 2003, it was a time when the social democracy was in power. The Polish president was Kwaśniewski, he was a social democrat, and the Polish prime minister was Leszek Miller. They sent the Polish soldiers to Iraq, to Afghanistan, and also Miller gave permission to build the secret prison in Poland to torture the people who were from Afghanistan Afghanistan. And now we have this big problem that if we want to build something in Poland, I don't know, demonstration, mass meeting, something like this, there are not many people, so very often they come people from the social democratic parties, and in these social democratic parties sometimes there are people with leftist mind. But the problem is that these war criminals like Leszek Miller, Aleksander Kwaśniewski, and many others, they are all the time active in the politics, and nobody say about them that they are war criminals. But Poland, of course, it is small country and send not so many soldiers like USA, but the moral responsibility Poland and USA is the same. And if there is the tribunal, the new Nuremberg for the war criminals for Iraq, Afghanistan, and other NATO occupation countries, I hope that these people from Polish Social Democracy and George W. Bush will be the same in prison, or I don't know, in other punishment.
Well, I would say that would be, for the Polish workers to decide and to go on. But what we would say too, regarding the Democratic Party in the United States, which by European standards, really kind of across the continent, would really be a center right party, not even kind of any left party. And then you have the Republicans that are really just the extreme right. And with the Democratic Party, this is fundamentally a counter-revolutionary party, from Obama and so on, it really shows, and Biden, and as we were saying earlier, that continuity of empire and of capitalism, of imperialism. And I know this isn't exactly of what you're mentioning of the Polish situation of the Social Democrat Party, but I think what this highlights is for bourgeois parties, there is fundamentally there's no possibility for revolution through a bourgeois vehicle, of that it will continually turn back into reform.
But could you say what is your position toward DSA and Ocasio-Cortez? Do you collaborate with them or do you fight with them?
Right. So we work with the DSA in many parts of the country, all across the country. You see so many progressive people, people who identify as socialists, and perhaps they have maybe a different definition. But we come together on so many issues. On anti-imperialism, on stopping the coup against Venezuela, on ending sanctions on Cuba, on other countries, of stopping the bombing of Iran and stopping against war on Iran, and now of a big campaign to cancel rents and mortgages and canceling rent debt. Which is a serious issue that's facing so many people. So we actually work with a number of different, anywhere from socialists to progressive people, and we work to build those points of unity as much as possible.
Okay, comrades, so thank you for your time. In the finish, I also want to make my greetings to the comrade Derek, because when he heard one time that he read Capital 10 times, he is my hero. That no, but very, very good comrade. Frankly, he is. I have big respect for his knowledge about Marx. I hope that one day I will become competent in Marx like him is today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, so one more time, could you say all your media where the people can find you, and we will finish. So it is your YouTube channel is Liberation News, yes? the Liberation School, sitinternet.org. You have other media?
Yeah, so Liberation School, Liberation News. You can find us also on podcast on Liberation Audio, and the Socialist program with Brian Becker. And Curry, please feel free to add in as well. You sign up for our newsletter.
All right.
Okay, so I will finish this.